Welcome everyone to the International Mentoring Community conversation about mentoring. And Stephen Hobbs here, who, I support the International Mentoring Community as the Director of Certification. And I have my co-founder of the International Mentoring Community. Doug, you want to share who you are?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Lawrence, and I'm the co-founder of the International Mentoring Community, and I'm also director of education today. And we'll see where that evolves over time, and we'll share a little bit more about why I made that comment as the morning goes on.
Oh, for sure. And to let everyone know, this community conversation about mentoring is in two parts. One from 10 to 11. Our time, that's Mountain Standard Time, is more for those who are getting into mentoring or exploring if mentoring fits for their lives with the people that they're assisting. And then the second hour that goes from approximately 11:15 to 12:15 is for those who have mentoring is in their blood already, and they're looking to get a little bit deeper into some of the topics. And Doug and I will certainly explore it either way for those who are coming to mentoring for the first time and those who are in it already and want to learn a little bit more. Now, the way that we've structured it is that we will do some recordings. So Doug and I are just going to have conversations, and then we may turn the recording off, have some other kind of conversations about what we're doing in the International Mentoring Community. And if someone jumps on board, then we'll have conversations with them on topics of their choosing. So it's very much a free flow time together here. And we thought that we would offer that considering where we are in the world today, and today being April 8th, things are still wild and woolly out there. And Doug and I wish you the best. And I know some of you may be at home, some of you may even be at work and listening to this. And we just wish you the best for what's happening. So with that, Doug, I think what would be really great is we were having a little chat just before we came fully online. And Doug was just mentioning he had a really interesting day yesterday with some conversations. And I know he and I had a conversation, and then he met a couple of other people. Do you want to just get us going, Doug? Because I think it links into one of the areas that is important to us in the International Mentoring Community is understanding the importance of lived experience, because the mentee learner in a mentoring way taps into that lived experience of the mentor. And I think it would be great to just take a trip around Doug's yesterday.
Well, and it was most definitely a very interesting day because it caused me to do lots of reflection. And so, and the reflection was more so on just because you and I have a really strong wealth of knowledge when it comes to mentoring. Not everybody shares that same position. And I had a couple calls yesterday where it was, I was actually taken aback to some extent when certainly my morning started off where I have no knowledge whatsoever about mentoring, so please tell me more. And that's how the conversation evolved. And at the end of the conversation, when we finally decided to sort of, okay, we're going to stay in touch and all that great stuff, it was the idea. I took a step back and I went, okay, I think we've done what we were supposed to do by providing the education, but the one message that stuck out for me, and it's one that I've heard numerous times, is I did not realize there was that much to mentoring. And I had that actually in both calls, the morning call and then one mid-afternoon yesterday, where it was, once we had the conversation and I explained the concepts and the processes, certainly at an entry level, and even sharing what it looks like with the idea of the journey mentor, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but with the idea of the journey mentor and getting into some different areas of being able to use mentoring as a means to provide support, the support structure. So one of the things that came out was one of the points that you mentioned, which is the whole idea of the lived experience. And I guess my favorite topic that always seems to come up when we start talking about that is, well, you have to have industry specific experience in order to mentor in that. And what I shared with both people was that's a nice to have, not a need to have. And I told the story about how going into a manufacturing industry where I had no previous experience whatsoever, but I knew how to ask questions, and that's what I did. And I not only did I gain the knowledge that I needed to continue to work in that space, but I also built strong relationships, trusted relationships that I would not have had if I gone in with some preconceived notions that this is what the industry is about.
So I think the point that you're raising is there's a lot of awareness still has to happen in terms of what is mentoring in comparison to coaching, facilitating, counseling, advising, all those different elements. And we'll certainly get into that more and more with the international mentoring community. But the notion is that you said that you asked some questions to be able to get into that domain of activity. I'm using the word domains, like domain of knowledge, domain of skills, to be able to get to a point that you could have the conversation. But I believe, and I'm going to use but there, but I believe that by asking those questions, did you not set up for the mentee that you're going to interact with this view of the value of asking questions?
Short answer would be yes. Sometimes, depending on the individual, sometimes they start to understand or realize that every time I give an answer, he asks me more questions. And so I think for some of the mentees that I'm working with in those situations, the asking of the questions catches a lot of them off guard more than anything else, because they're just, why is he asking me, to tell a little bit more? Why does he need to know about what I do in particular? So, because one of my questions will be, so tell me a little bit about what you do on a daily basis. And then how do you interact with other departments, other parts of the organization? So explain some of that to me. What products and services do you offer? Who's your target audience? And going through all of that and gleaning all of that. And so a couple things is that, number one, it demonstrates an interest, a keen interest in them as a person and what they do. But it also, as you explore deeper and deeper and deeper, it also helps you gain that deeper understanding of them as an individual, which is probably why you're there in the first place.
And then that leads them into this notion, well, if I have this lived experience sitting across from me, right, or computer to computer, I have to tap into that somehow. So asking questions of that person. So essentially it starts to flip around a little bit, whereas the mentor is asking the questions to establish the arrangement, then the mentee is, okay, but I need to foster the relationship so I can get to a point of asking them questions to tap into their experience. And then it's sort of between us, we're now doing what it is we do, this sort of magical dance of mentoring. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that would definitely be fair. One of the, just as we've been, one of the thoughts that poured through my mind was one of the individuals that I had spent some time with, a bit of an abrasive uh, demeanor, and wouldn't wouldn't some of the times wouldn't take the time to sort of pause and reflect before they actually spoke, and it ended up they'd get themselves into some grief, and then it would be time for a mentoring session with me, and all I would ask one simple question: is there a different way we could have dealt with this particular situation? And they kind of go, well, what do you think? And I said, no, I need you to sort of think your way through this, and maybe let me help you out. What would happen if in that situation you were to do this, this, or this? What would be some of the outcomes that you would get as a result of taking either one of those three options and getting them to think? And when we did that, it was surprising what the outcomes would actually be, and how that individual got to understand and know that if we sat down to have a conversation and he told me what happened, he could pretty much put money in the bank on the fact that I'm going to fire a bunch of questions at him, and literally force him to rethink his way through that situation.
And that's the sense of the reflection in, reflection on. Often, like coaches, we're talking something that's very similar to coaching as well, is that from a coaching perspective, you're asking questions of the coachee, but you're doing it from a position of what is it that you've got to get done? What are the accountabilities you've got to fulfill? Not necessarily what is about life and how what you're doing interacts with your life and the life of others, right? Mentoring has a little bit of a different flavor in the use of its questions to be able to get a person to reflect on and reflect in. And this reflection aspect is another important part of the international mentoring community, to get people to understand that. And then to get to a point where they have the practice of, well, while I'm in the conversation, I can be reflecting. And when the conversation is sort of done, I can reflect on the conversation, because you're going, oh, okay, there's more to this than just fulfilling my accountability, getting my job done, and doing it so I can sort of say, yes, check, I did my performance for the day. Mentoring has more than just simply checklists. Mm-hmm. And it's more about that guiding the person to the pathway. I jokingly say, but it's not necessarily a joke either, is to have this notion of being able to see it in a different way, and that's what's really important. We have Yvonne, I think, is joining us, Doug, and
excellent.
I'm not quite sure if she's here yet, completely in.
But I'm just going to listen. I had early meetings, and then I switched up getting out of the shower to a later time. So
no problems. No,
I don't want to be on the recording.
Oh, I see. Okay, no problems. No problems. No, and just as an introduction, Yvonne is someone who is working with Doug and I on some of the projects associated with the international mentoring community. So it's great to have you on board, Yvonne. And just to let you know, Doug and I are just having a conversation about lived experience and mentoring and coaching and doing it from that perspective. So if at any time you want to jump in with a question or a comment, please do, okay?
Thank you.
All righty. And yeah, so that reflection piece is so important, isn't it, Doug? Because that's really one of the main shifts that takes place between coaching and mentoring.
Well, and you said the word checklist, and you talked about, checking off the boxes, so to speak, on a checklist and that. And what I find is that, certainly with my mentoring practice, is that I don't have a checklist per se. I have an idea, depending upon the initial part of the conversation. I have an idea of where we're going to go, but I don't want to put myself in a place where I have to follow a checklist. And, you know, if somebody says this, you go this way. And if somebody said, I don't want to go that. And I've seen it where I've had people that are wanting to get started in the mentoring space where they've said, well, have you got a list of questions that you can give me that I can ask, or a checklist that I can follow, so that if I get into, you know, if I'm sitting down with somebody and we're kind of staring at each other and neither one of us wants to begin the conversation, and yeah, that does happen, is the idea of being able to sort of think on your feet and being able to work your way through that without having a checklist to follow.
Yes. And I brought that up purposely is because in my time, what I do is more of what's called facilitative mentoring, is that I'm drawing ideas out of the person. So facilitating them and then mentoring them and learning from that interactions with that person as well. In our definition, the international mentoring community, it's a two-way trusted conversation, a collaborative conversation that's establishing a collaborative alliance. And if we go into it with that checklist, it sort of starts to feel a little mechanical. Yeah. And I can appreciate where someone might be new to mentoring and they're going, I wouldn't mind having a few little things to work with, but I wouldn't necessarily call them checklists. What I would do is I would just call them, you know, keywords, keyword phrases, or anything like that. So, yeah.
If I can add to that.
Sure, go for it.
Doug and Stephen, one of the best practices that I had brought forward when I was chairing the BPW Calgary mentorship group was to actually bring a list of suggested questions, just sort of rapport building questions to get them started, so that, you know, if someone was brand new to mentoring, someone was brand new to being a protege, that they weren't, as you say, just sitting staring at each other saying, okay, what do we talk about? And, you know, some of them are fairly basic questions, but it's still, I think it still gave them a level of comfort that they were doing it right from the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
But would it be, Yvonne, that the list wasn't necessarily like a chronological progressive? There's still a randomness to it so that you could play with it, versus someone taking a series of questions like a checklist and going, well, 1 has to go to 2, 2 has to go to 3, 3 has to go to 4. I think you left it more on the random side.
It was, yes, it was guidelines. So, you know, here are some suggested questions. And then I also had taken it further and put a framework together covering off the first 6 months of the relationship, because at that first year when I took on the program, it was a year-long program. And I wanted to allow for the participants to help build out the remaining conversations, but I was encouraging them to consider, you know, if the person's working in this particular field, you know, maybe there are some associations that they might consider joining, or some specific magazines that are very relevant and have a lot of content that might be helpful for them, or maybe inviting them to a networking meeting that they never would have the opportunity to be invited to before because it was guests only. So it was a list of a number of things that were supports for them to get going comfortably. That was really the key thing, is get that rapport building, the trust building piece happening early, and give them some supports, but still the conversation was confidential, it was fluid, and it went where it needed to go, as Doug said.
Great, yeah. Well, that's that, it doesn't sound mechanical, so, and thank you for sharing that. But Yvonne, why don't you share a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do for the world?
My background is basically working through various senior HR roles for about 15 years, and then doing 5 years of HR consulting. And then leading back into some corporate experiences that helped me identify that I really loved coaching. I liked seeing where you have a conversation with someone who is in one particular space or mindset, and then 3 or 4 questions later, how we can completely shift the energy around by creating space to have conversations that deepen their awareness and create new ideas and opportunities. So my work today is typically working predominantly with women, helping women to teaching them to flourish in business by having more confident conversations. That's an area of expertise. And I mostly work with women leaders who are either corporate leaders or women entrepreneurs and founders who have businesses that are ready for growth and scaling up and potentially looking to add staff and become that more seasoned leader that needs to step into their authentic self very confidently. So that's my work.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you. Is there any question that you believe would be of value to someone who is coming to mentoring and exploring it for the first time? Is there a question or a thought that we can explore with you?
Well, I was just looking back at some of the sort of kickoff tips that had been put together in the past. I think it's really important to set the stage of what mentoring is and what it isn't early on, to explore what might be some outcomes that the protege is looking to gain from the conversation, and then just to reassure them that everything that's discussed is in confidence and it won't be discussed at a detailed level, even though you might be recording for certification your hours or time spent with them, the date, but the essence of the conversation remains in confidence. And then letting them know that they, as the protege, are the one who is, in essence, driving the bus. So they're expected to be the person who is bringing forward what it is that they want to learn, what it is that they might have challenges with, bringing the discussion points forward, and then the mentor will be guiding them based on their experiences, because sometimes proteges don't know the questions to ask because they just haven't been in that situation before. So it's that's where the dance is so interesting, where the protege thinks they want one thing and the mentor knows that in order to get there they need to back up a little bit and put some foundational pieces in place.
Yes. Now, you use the word protege. Do you want to share why you use that term? We've been using mentee and learner, and you're bringing protege to the
I use mentor and protege because I find that sometimes when I'm working with people who are new into programs or new into those conversations, it's easier for them to distinguish whether they are a mentor or a mentee if it's actually a different word. So mentor is the guide and the protege is the person who's predominantly coming to learn, although as we all know, as a mentor, you learn just as much out of the conversation as the protege does. It's very rewarding.
Yes, for sure. Doug, any thoughts about protege for you?
It's definitely one of the terms that's used, and I'll even add apprentice as another one to the mix. So I do some stuff with at-risk youth, and part of the organization that runs the program is they refer to the at-risk youth that are part of their program as apprentices. So we have mentors and we have apprentices. So for me, the protege, the terminology protege, speaks to the aspect of the learning and development relationship that a mentor has with, using our terminology, with the mentee. So I think they're interchangeable, and it just depends on individuals' personal preference. And because I know with a lot of corporate mentorship programs, it's mentor and mentee. And the term protege doesn't usually come into play all that horribly often.
Yeah, I think it brings up a great point, and let me see, Yvonne, Doug, the importance of words. Well, when we're talking about mentoring and mentor, mentee, protege, learner, apprentice, right? The practice of mentoring, the competence of mentor, the presence of mentorship. Like there's a lot of words that sometimes get thrown around in there. Would you agree that words are important and we have to figure out which words going to fit for that arrangement, for that relationship?
I would have to agree that words are extremely important. Otherwise, I would be tripping myself up, because I had a best-selling book in November 2018 called Words, Women, and Wisdom, The Modern Art of Confident Conversations. And it looks at 40 different words and word concepts. And very often we can shift the energy, because the book is intended to help women elevate their confidence by having more powerful conversations. Sometimes it's a word that in some contexts would seem like there's not that much difference, and yet there is. If I take should and could, for example, should has a very obligatory tone to it. It sounds almost like you're being forced to do something. You don't want to do it, but you have this obligation to complete. I really should be doing this. Whereas could is an air of lightness and possibility, and the energy behind the word is quite different. So I'm definitely a fan of picking the right word. And if within this context, if I need to switch my language for it to be mentee in order for that to be consistent in the programming here, I'm certainly happy to do that.
Doug, any thoughts?
Well, it was just Yvonne's brought up an interesting point, was the use of the word should. And I actually was doing some work with a professor out at the University of Regina, and she literally beat it into me, where every time I would say, well, we should do this, and she'd go, nope, just wait, there's no shoulds in life. So get rid of that word, come up with something else. So it was quite interesting how, from her perspective, exactly like Yvonne had said, was the word should has a completely different connotation than perhaps what we're looking for.
I think
we want mentoring to be to be an expansive conversation. It's a fantastic learning opportunity. And if you start introducing words that sound like they're too structured or too rigid or law or obligation, I think it shifts the potential outcome, because it shifts the energy around the conversation.
Yes. And that's why one of the important elements of setting up a mentoring relationship, mentoring arrangement, and you mentioned it, Yvonne, is the importance of defining the terms and concepts very early on in the connection and the arrangement.
Yeah, and very often what I'll do if I'm doing a kickoff session for a mentoring program, I'll talk about what's the difference between some of the words that are commonly used as a way to learn. So whether it's coaching, counseling, consulting, training, managing, mentoring, they all are different. Coaching being the only one really that is future based, because it's questions regarding a future potential. Counseling very much looking at past issues. Tell me about your childhood. What might have led up to this, past beliefs. Consulting more of being you are coming to the table as the expert with strategies and solutions. So that's very much telling as opposed to asking. Training, again, how to do a task really well. That's telling. Managing, hopefully managing is now moved into the arena around expected performance, at least, of being a combination of telling and asking. I'll tell you as the leader what I need, what outcome I need, and when I need it by, and then I'll ask you how you plan to start accomplishing it so that you can get it done on time. So it's a combo. And then mentoring, again, being a combination of telling and asking. Here's how I did this. what could you do, given that you have that insight now of one potential way that might work for you? So it's telling and asking. But it's useful, I think, I've had a lot of feedback on that particular slide in the past, saying, oh yeah, now I get it.
The element of these words that we're talking about, I believe, is going to be a consistent and long-term conversation within the international mentoring community. Because as we expand and extend what we're doing, we're going to be getting a lot of different views of a lot of the words that Yvonne just mentioned. Managing and leading, coaching and mentoring, facilitating and training. These are going to be on the table many, 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 many times, and we welcome it because that's what we're needing to do.